My name is Adam Miron. I'm the co-founder of HEXO Cannabis. I'm the executive chairman of Brain Capital. I'm an entrepreneur, an investor, and I'm ready to start digging deep.
Hi, I'm Mark Sutcliffe, and I'm on a quest to learn from the best. Welcome to Digging Deep, presented by Zen Books and Abacus Data. This is the latest in our series of one-on-one conversations with thoughtful, interesting, accomplished people in many different fields. So in January 2018, Adam Miron was driving on a highway in western Quebec. He was heading towards his home in Ottawa when he was able to announce to a colleague that his company was now worth $1 billion, $1 billion. Now, only 5 years earlier, Adam and his brother-in-law, Sébastien St. Louis, had started the company in a basement office. That office was only about 175 square feet in size. And Adam and Sébastien were only 29 years old at the time. They put in about $35,000 of their own money. That company eventually became HEXO. HEXO is one of the largest licensed cannabis companies in Canada. And that 5-year journey from $35,000 in investment to $1 billion is chronicled in a best-selling book called $1 Billion Startup. How did they do it? That fascinating story is what we're going to hear today from Adam Miron. Adam is also going to share some of the lessons about entrepreneurship that he learned at a very young age from his father, and how that sparked an interest in him in owning his own business. We're also going to hear about things like luck and confidence and taking risks. We're going to hear why Adam set out to build a certain kind of culture in his company, a culture of appreciation and not fear, and why he thinks if you're going to do well in business, your mortgage, your house, has to depend upon it. Now, one last thing before we get started. If you like what you hear on this podcast, then please subscribe to Digging Deep and post a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, and share this podcast with your network. We'd love for you to introduce it to others. And if you're looking for more information, please go to letsdigdeep.com. Now, let's start digging deep with the co-founder of HEXO and the co-author of $1 Billion Startup, Adam Miron. Adam, it's so great to welcome you to Digging Deep. We have many mutual friends, and I have admired your career. You have a book out that's doing really well, which we're going to talk about as well, $1 Billion Startup. So I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And let's get to know you a little bit with some of our opening questions. What would you say is your fondest childhood memory?
Oh, man. Elementary school, waiting out on the driveway for the opening day of my first business with my dad.
And we're going to talk about that because that is a big part of your story, how your father invested in you, an entrepreneurial outlook. So we'll come back to that. Who would you say was your hero when you were 10 years old?
10 years old, Razor Ramon.
Who's
WWF.
That? Oh, okay. All right. And what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be an astronaut. I could see myself flying planes and then working my way into space. I mean, maybe one day I'll still get into space, but I want to be an astronaut when I grow up.
What's your life story in 6 words?
Oh, man. Until about 10 years ago, 6 words: something to prove, nothing to lose.
Okay. Has it changed since then?
Definitely. Yeah.
Is it a different outlook now? Is that...
Oh, huge. I mean, now that the notion of nothing to lose, of course, is long gone with a wife and 3 beautiful daughters. And, it genuinely was, nothing to lose with something to prove. That I think both of those have fundamentally changed. I don't feel as though I have nearly as much to prove, and I have a hell of a lot to lose. Okay.
What's your greatest mistake, or what is a mistake you made somewhere along the way, and what did you learn from it?
I think the greatest mistake I made was, for a long time, I didn't consciously practice return on failure. I made mistakes and I internalized them as shortcomings. And I've been lucky to have made so many mistakes that now, with a change of mindset and practicing return on failure, I've been able to learn from so many more. And I look back and think, man, I didn't learn from a lot of my early mistakes. I think that in and of itself is the biggest mistake.
I like that term, return on failure. We'll talk more about that. For what do you feel most grateful?
Oh, my wife and daughters.
What's been the best year of your life so far and why?
2020, hands down. I mean, it's been a tough year for a lot of people, and we're very sensitive to that. But I mean, I got to work on some very exciting projects. I've been closer to my family physically, emotionally, verbally than ever before. I mean, we read Swiss Family Robinson this in 2020, and we genuinely felt like an inner city Swiss Family Robinson trapped in our house as if it was our island. And the bonds that we have as a result of this have never been better.
Wow. What's been the toughest year of your life so far?
That would be 2015. We were pre-inflection point in our business. We had everything to lose, everything we owned, and all of our capital was sunk into this business. I was working 80 hours a week with two young kids that I was never getting to see. I wasn't making an income, and my father was, in his final days. So that was 2015 was a tough one.
What one person has had the greatest impact on your life?
My mom, hands down. I mean, I believe that you can have all the skills or training to do just about anything, but without confidence, you rarely make it work. And my mom instilled in me an incredible sense of confidence that you can do it to just about anything. And I think that's been the single biggest contributing factor from an individual.
How did she do that?
There's a funny story. I remember my mom would always just say, Adam, you would be great at that. And it actually got to a point where I was frustrated once as a kid. And I went home just to mess with her. And I said, Mom, I figured it out. When I grow up, I'm going to be a hairdresser, which of course I think is a very respectable profession, but I wanted to see a reaction compared to astronaut. And you know what she said? Adam, you'll be the best hairdresser there ever was. And I just thought, all right, I don't know if this lady's what she's on about, but apparently there's something there, and it stuck. And so for me, that notion that you can do it has really given me that courage to push things forward.
That's a wonderful story. That's lovely. What is the most important lesson that you've learned that you would want to share with other people?
Well, if I could just limit it to business, I mean, if it's a business lesson, it's relentless effort. I mean, I genuinely believe that, I think most entrepreneurs know that you have to work really hard. I think very few actually do it. And here's why. You can work hard and not get lucky, but luck is something that comes and goes, and we all know is out of our control. But if you're not working relentlessly hard for when luck comes your way, it vanishes in an instant.
It's a great point. What is the biggest factor that you would say led you to where you are today?
Well, I'd probably say hustle, but knowing me, the reality is that while there was an incredible amount of hustle, it was the people that were supporting me. I couldn't have done this without everybody behind me at all times.
What would people be most surprised to learn about you?
Depends how well they know me, I suppose. God, I guess there's a bunch of things. I was that kid that was president of the student union a year before everyone else, but I was like struggling to cling to C's and B's. I did not do particularly well in my grades in school. I am not what people would consider traditionally book smart.
Okay. What's your secret talent?
I have 20/5 vision. I can see incredibly well. I mean,
Okay.
My forefathers may not have been able to outrun the saber-toothed tigers, but we saw them coming before anyone else.
So, what's an example of where that would come into play? Like of something you can see really well that other people don't see.
Well, it's not a metaphor for like seeing to the future. It's literally just what most people can see at 5 feet. I can see from 20 feet.
Wow, that's pretty cool. What's the most fun you've ever had?
Oh, in that top 10 list, almost all of them are waking up early with my girls, my daughters, and we're in a new country. We're going to go watch the sunrise, or we're going to go explore. We love traveling. We love being together.
What's the scariest thing you've ever done?
Top Gun ride, Six Flags in California. I was 12. I had tears running down my cheeks waiting in line. And I just thought, there's no way I can do this. And I was petrified, but I pulled it off. I got on and I did it.
Good for you. What is your boldest prediction for the future?
Okay. Boldest prediction for the future. I genuinely believe that our kids, or the next generation, will fundamentally understand, perceive reality differently than we do. as we further advance our understanding of quantum physics.
Okay. Let's talk more about that coming up. That's interesting. What would be the message of your commencement address if you were talking to a group of graduating students today?
Confidence is your biggest asset. You have to invest in it. You have to nurture it and you have to grow it. Without confidence, it doesn't matter what skills or training you have.
What's been a recent epiphany for you? Is there anything that you've made a recent discovery about or changed your mind about?
Well, courtesy of COVID in this last year, it turns out I might actually be an introvert, which has been a major epiphany, or at least I'm far more introverted than I ever thought.
Okay. So you didn't think you were, but now like you've observed your own behavior during the pandemic and that's convinced you otherwise?
That's right. I enjoy all this time to myself. I enjoy, and just I can find energy sources. I can find enjoyment outside of constantly being around other people.
What book are you most likely to recommend to others? Is there one that's had a big impact on you?
Is this a door opening for a shameless plug on my own book here?
No, it can't be your own book. Yeah.
Okay. I think everyone should read a book on Ikigai. I think that if you don't get that, if that's a new term for you, you need to do that. At least watch something on it. Tim Tarashino did an excellent TED Talk on Ikigai. I think that's important in every aspect of your life. If it's business-wise, if you're about to start a business, I think everyone should read E-Myth. If you've already started a business, Never Split the Difference in terms of actually being able to negotiate. And yes, exactly.
Got the E-Myth book right here next to me. Yeah.
And how is it?
Oh, it's great. Yeah. And Never Split the Difference, which is by Chris Voss. It's about negotiating. I read that book. Excellent book. Yeah.
And Crossing the Chasm.
Okay. And for those people who don't know what Ikigai is, can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I am not an expert, but certainly in my pursuit, entrepreneurial pursuit, and my pursuit of trying to figure out happiness, there's sort of this fourth element. Effectively, the notion is a Japanese concept that some Western European anthropologists went to this village in Japan to find that it had this highest concentration of people that lived to be 100. And they sort of said, what is it? Is it the water? Is it the soil? What's going on? And they all said very matter of factly, well, it's because of our Ikigai. And so it's this concept of, what are you good at? What can you get paid for? What does the world need? Which is that sort of fourth key element, right? And when you put together all these notions, it's that what does the world need? How do you make the world a better place? It's how do you add to the external environment versus just yourself. And so I think it's really important that, especially in this day and age, as we sort of constantly find ourselves bombarded with information and changing jobs more often than ever, what actually gives back in a meaningful way specific to us?
Yeah, you describe it very well. And that is, I know more and more people are becoming attuned to that. So very interesting. Adam, I appreciate you answering those questions. We're going to start digging deep into your incredible story. Adam Miron is our guest, and we will be right back. We're just going to take a quick break so I can tell you a little bit more about the presenting sponsor of Digging Deep, ZenBooks. ZenBooks is Canada's go-to cloud accounting firm. They are not your typical accounting firm. I know the founders, Colin and Eric. I've worked with them for several years. And here's why I think you should consider working with them too. First of all, they bring a fresh, unique, modern approach to what is a very old-fashioned industry. These guys were working remotely and in the cloud long before it became cool. ZenBooks also uses technology to your advantage. I think this is really important. They give you the tools and analysis you need to monitor your business in real time. That's so valuable right now when everything changes so quickly. Yes, they're a virtual accounting firm, but that doesn't mean they're offshore, and it doesn't mean they're inattentive. ZenBooks combines the efficiency and effectiveness of a cloud accounting service with all the benefits that you'd want from a trusted advisor, high-level advice, and strategic support. Now, here's what I think is going to happen if you work with ZenBooks. You'll probably start out taking advantage of their cutting-edge cloud accounting solutions, but in the long run, I think you'll stay with them because of their strategic guidance and problem solving. Among their core values, they specifically list being candid and proactive. Isn't that exactly what you want from a trusted advisor? Look, even if you're already working with an accountant or a bookkeeper, or you have some accounting staff on your team, I think you should still talk to ZenBooks and learn more about their tools and their expertise. Check out ZenBooks at zenbooks.ca. That's zenbooks.ca. Digging Deep is all about helping you make better decisions, and so is Abacus Data. Most leaders struggle to connect with and engage their audiences. Why is that? It's because they aren't sure how they think and feel and how they will react. Abacus Data can give you the strategic insights you need to make better decisions and to make them confidently. Here's a good example. A major national union was recently negotiating a new agreement for its thousands of members. This had the potential to be a very difficult process. There were many competing interests. So they brought in Abacus Data to conduct thorough and detailed research of their members to learn exactly where they stood, what they were thinking, what they wanted. And as a result, they were able to secure a strong new deal that was accepted overwhelmingly in a national vote. Abacus Data helps all of its clients understand what's really happening in the minds of their employees, clients, and stakeholders. They help them avoid costly blind spots. And they're really good at what they do. In fact, Abacus Data was one of the most accurate pollsters in the 2019 Canadian federal election. Make the one decision that will improve all of your other decisions. Let Abacus Data help you move forward with confidence and clarity. Go to abacusdata.ca. That's abacusdata.ca. Adam, once again, it's so much fun to be chatting with you, and we were just chatting about ikigai, this Japanese concept, and it doesn't mean, just to be clear for everyone, it doesn't mean some guy who's icky. It sounds like that. It's IKIGAI, and it is the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. And I think it's so interesting because I think a lot of people think about the intersection of two of those things, or maybe even three of those things, but this is all four. Like, I think we've all been taught, oh, you should do what you love, but obviously maybe find something that you can be paid for, or that you're good at and that you can be paid for. But that added element of what is it that the world needs, I think, is a really important component, right?
100%. And think about the great tie-in back to the E-Myth, right? That notion that there's something that you're really good at, therefore you set out to go make that what I can get paid for as a business owner. And again, you're into that trap of really only focusing on the three, right? That fourth one is, how do you make the world a better place? What is your purpose?
Great stuff. All right. So let's talk about where your interest in entrepreneurship began, because it starts with your dad. And just walk us through the impact that your dad had on your life, and especially when you were a child, how he instilled this entrepreneurial spirit in you.
My dad was a great innovator. He was a guy who had no problems figuring something out, even if that meant figuring out how to make a few dollars. He never finished high school. He was one of many kids growing up, and with me, when we were growing up, he was always this great guy to sort of teach you in such a unique way that you would really learn. And I'd like to sort of say he would always walk me to the stream, but never give me the water. And, so a perfect example that I referenced earlier with that first business, it was a very cold spring morning, and we were out tuning up my bike and, lifting the seat, getting the grease on the chain, tightening up the brakes. And he would ask me these series of questions, perpetually asking me these questions, being like, you think everybody has to do this in the spring? And I'd say, yeah, probably. And they'd say, you think everyone knows how to do this? You think everyone has the tools to do this? And then, he would get, and I'm sure he would just, like, after a while, he's just going cross-eyed. But he would then finally get to the point when he'd say, you think people would pay a couple of bucks to have someone do this? And then eventually I go, hold on, hold on, Dad, I have an idea. You go, what is it? Like, what if we did this? And it's like, after 45 minutes of sweating it out of me, but it was always my idea. And in that, the excitement that it built, we decided to do this little bike shop, and we would charge people a couple of bucks if they would bring their bike, and we would tune it up. And so I remember at work, he had printed off this little advertisement we made on some antiquated program on the computer, dot matrix, 4 in a page. And that night we cut them out of the paper and I took them to school. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, like I really have to put myself out there. I have to walk down the halls and hand these out to everybody and say, here's what I'm doing. Here's what I am. Please come, right? In effect, in a way, I was like asking for validation, which for someone like me was a big thing. So I handed out all of these flyers. Next morning, that was on a Friday. Next morning, it's Saturday. My dad woke me up early. He had his coffee. We got bundled up, and I stood at the top of the driveway, and we opened up the garage door. And I just remember waiting, like, is anyone going to come? Will there literally be anyone that comes? And they did. And more came and more came. And then this group came with 4 or 5 bikes, and the tires, a couple of tires had been torn. There was a tube that needed to be replaced. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. And just as I was about to get started, my dad grabbed me and he pulled me aside and he said, just give us a second. He says, so, and again, with the questions, which ultimately led to me turning around and saying, yes, we can get all of these fixed up for you. No problem. And I made $100 that day. And my first day, I think I was, 8, maybe 10. And I made $100 that day running that bike shop with my dad. And it was like, what have we just created? And the seed was planted. I've been an entrepreneur ever since.
Wow. And there's so many interesting aspects to that story, but what I love is the way he showed you without telling you, right? That's I think an essential component to this.
Yeah, without a doubt, he made it mine. It was something that I could come up with. I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't being passed a glass of water. I was being pointed in the direction of the stream.
Yeah. And so tell me how that kind of developed and grew over time, because, and we'll get to the story obviously of HEXO and how you started that, and even sort of, kind of how you landed on the cannabis industry and those kinds of things. But where did your entrepreneurial interest and skills develop from there?
It took me a while to realize that business is really about solving problems, right? And we would work on all sorts of different businesses. And he worked at the hospital, the small hospital in the very small town that we lived in. And one day they needed to buy something called a computer because they were going to be the first place in the town to get the internet. And so it was his job to start to figure out where computers could even be sourced. And if you lived in McBride, British Columbia, 211 kilometers away from Prince George was the only place that you could even think about talking to somebody about a computer. So my dad sat down with me around the table and he said, so listen, I have to buy these computers. I know you've heard of them. The only place to get them is Prince George. And I remember getting excited saying, can I come with you? And he goes, you can, and I want you to come with me for a different reason. And he said, why do you think we have to go all the way to Prince George to get them? I said, well, maybe there's nobody here. And again, with the questions. And it led to, I have an idea. What if we started selling computers here? And we did. And then that led to, well, there's no internet. Well, can we figure out a way to get the internet here? And we did. And so, if you were in Northern British Columbia at that time, there was only one internet service provider called AAA Miron Computer Services. And my dad, gave me that opportunity to sort of put it in front of me to help me just build something and create something. Again, it's the same story. I could tell you it 100 different ways with 100 different projects. Some worked, some didn't. In fact, most of them didn't work, but we learned from all of them.
What do you think it was about your dad that pushed him in this direction and that made him want to instill this in you?
I think it was probably security. My dad had always sort of pushed for me under the same sort of guiding principle to sort of have a trade under my belt. My sister was smart enough to follow that advice and became a journeyman electrician. I did not. And it was like security, when you grow up with very, very little and you don't have, and often when you can't pay rent, you got to find somewhere in a hurry to live. I think a lot of it came from a sense of insurance.
He wanted you to be able to look after yourself, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
exactly.
I think there's something interesting about that, because I think a lot of parents, don't necessarily steer their children towards entrepreneurship because they feel that it's an uncertain environment. There's a lot of risk. Whereas, and so they steer them towards reliable jobs as an option, right? And you can understand the instinct for that, because you want to give that kind of stability to your kids, and not worry about the all the variances that can occur in entrepreneurship. But at the same time, an entrepreneur knows how to innovate. An entrepreneur knows how to look after himself or herself. Is that part of what your dad was aiming you towards?
100%. You know, happy to keep talking about my dad and what he built there, but the importance, other side of it is that, you know, I had my dad teaching me the skills and my mom giving me the confidence. And so when an idea came up, I again, without either one, it wouldn't have worked for me. It might for others, but certainly for me, I needed both of those things in tandem, and they came through. But if I could just come back to something you said, Mark, I get the surface optics of it. People will almost always think that having a job is more secure. Unfortunately, I mean, you're an entrepreneur yourself. I mean, you know that that's certainly not always the case. You know, the amount of times that as director, you know, of different companies, we have to make some very hard decisions about employees as businesses fluctuate. You know, it's great to say there's more security in a job. I would love to actually dig in and look at the statistics on that, because I'm not entirely sure that's true.
Yeah, and I would argue, and look, everybody's different, right? So everyone has a different appetite for risk, and we can't
Definitely.
all be starting businesses. Some of us have to work in those jobs, but as an entrepreneur, I have always felt comfortable that when things have gone wrong, I never doubted that I could figure out some other way moving forward of occupying myself and making money, right? So that's the in a strange way, that's the security you get from entrepreneurship, even though to an outsider it looks like a less secure environment.
You know, I think it begs the question of what is the definition of entrepreneurship? And we often will say, well, it's to create something. And to me, it's to build something. You know, we were 6 months into HEXO, which was then called Hydropothecary, and we needed a CFO that knew what he was doing. We needed an Eric Schmidt, if you will. And in came Ed Chaplin, you know, a staple in the Ottawa financial scene. And Ed was an entrepreneur just as much as we were. I mean, yes, it wasn't his idea. Yes, he didn't incorporate the company, but he created something from nothing and he built it with us as our CFO. I mean, to me, entrepreneurialism is taking chances at all levels. You don't have to be the guy that created the business. You just have to start to work to build something new. You can be an entrepreneur in a Fortune 500 if you start something new in a new line. Like, I think that perhaps my definition of it is different than others, but I consider a lot more people entrepreneurial than they might give themselves credit for.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you can be an entrepreneur in any role, right? It's an
Yes.
approach to whatever objective you have, and it's the idea of building something. But I think essential in that definition as well is being comfortable with uncertainty, being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Agreed. Back to
Yeah.
confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. So your parents kind of gave you this lethal combination in a lot of ways of a spirit of entrepreneurship and a confidence that you could do anything, right? That's deadly. I think that's terrific.
Yeah, I've got a lot to be thankful for. You know, I appreciate how you said, you know, in the past that, you know, you were born with a winning lottery ticket. I feel similar in that I was born and there was a winning lottery ticket somewhere. I had to be told where to find it, and I had to dig and look pretty hard for it, but it was there, and I found it, and again, I have my parents to thank for that.
Mm. So you also kind of pursued an interest in politics for a while. I know in British Columbia, you were involved in politics, and I think politics is what brought you to Ottawa.
That's right.
But you maintained your entrepreneurial career, of course. And then there's another important person in this story who is your brother-in-law and future business partner, Sebastien St. Louis. Tell me about him and how you ended up together, and then we'll get into the story of how you co-founded what is now HEXO.
So I remember I was at a party once. My wife is going to kill me for telling this story. And there was a very beautiful woman at the party. And I remember thinking, boy, I need to figure out a way to talk to her. And I didn't that night. But about a month and a half or two later, my friend who had hosted that party sent an email and said, hey, there's this speed dating event going on organized by some of my friends. And I said, it wouldn't be by chance, so-and-so that was at your party, who of course is my future wife, so it's okay. And he said, yeah, you were supposed to be 26, I think, to come to the speed dating event. And, it was 20 dates, 20 minutes. It was this whole thing. I wasn't quite old enough to go, but that didn't matter. I knew what I wanted. And so I was convinced I was just going to do it anyways. And so I think about sixth or seventh date in, I'm having this great date with Mina. And you're supposed to leave a little comment for the person if you don't know how these work. And if you check yes and she checks yes, the organizers then exchange your phone number so you can get in touch with each other. Yeah. And I just remember
again, just to be clear, you're going around the room meeting 20 people in a very short period of time, and you're each evaluating each other, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you got to play the number. So you check yes for everyone. Why wouldn't you? Right?
Yeah.
But you can still have a mandate. And my mandate was to talk to Mina. And I did. And, one thing led to the next. It was a beautiful summer romance that blossomed to where we are today. And she said, after about a month, she said, I want you to meet my sister. And I thought, all right, great. So we went out for dinner. We went to Absinthe in Wellington West. And I remember meeting.
For those people outside Ottawa, that happens to be in the neighborhood where you and I both live. It's a great restaurant. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. And we did not like each other. I mean, talk about two strong type A personality guys, both with chips on their shoulders and something to prove, but had neither really proven anything to anyone. And so we sat across the table. Well, our girlfriends at the time they're the best of friends that could be, and they're just talking away, and Sebastian and I basically sat at each other staring at each other with our arms crossed for the first while. And then finally enough absinthe flowed through, and we walked home arm in arm singing songs, and it's been an incredible bromance ever since. But the reality is that we are very similar, but we are also incredibly different. We for fun will articulate some of those differences. Is that if the climate permitted, Sebastian would wear flip-flops and short-sleeved Under Armour every day of the year, and he does for almost every day of the year. Where my preference is to be a little more dressed up, and he's an incredible at the numbers, and that is not my strong suit. So whereas I like to focus on the people and the relationships, he focuses on the numbers. Hand in hand, we were unstoppable. And as we built this business, we would work together 12 hours a day in the basement in this little semi-detached that I had where Chinatown meets Little Italy in Ottawa. And work would be over and we'd be like, what do you want to do now? Well, let's go hang out. And we would go hang out after we just spent working together nonstop. So I've been incredibly lucky, not just to get, to find an incredible wife that supported me, but also through that, a brother-in-law that's become my business partner.
So was HEXO, what's now HEXO, you started it as Hydropothecary. Was that your first idea on what you were going to work together on, or what were some of the other things, and how did you end up deciding, okay, we're not just going to be buddies, but we're actually going to start something together?
So we were in that sweet spot where we were young and confident and didn't have kids. And we were both entrepreneurial enough that we had a number of businesses that were generating, sustainable revenue for us to live our lives. So neither of us were working much more than, 10, 12 hours a week, but we were hungry for our next project. And he was really focused in the real estate space where he had really grown. He was 28 and he had about 22 rental properties that he owned and operated. I had a number of online newspaper publications that were generating revenue. And we were both looking for a project. We probably evaluated 5 or 6. And I remember he had offered to help me on some of his. I was helping him with some of his. And we were getting together a lot, sort of just during the day, talking business. And we were looking, like we were on the hunt for what the next thing was, which is why when he came to me at that barbecue and he said, I figured it out, I knew exactly what he meant. It was, I figured out what we're going to do in business together. Now, of course, he told me it was cannabis, and I was like, get the hell out of here. There's no way. Not for me. No, thank you. But he said, wait, listen, it's legal, it's legit. This is a real business. I've put together a P&L. I want to show you some numbers. And so I walked home that day from that barbecue with my wife and our little baby daughter in the carriage now, pushing her. And I said, Seb wants to come over tomorrow and running me through a business idea about growing cannabis. And she's like, well, we're smart enough to listen to Seb if he's got something to say. And like 15 minutes in the next morning in my basement, showing me a spreadsheet, I was like, yeah, we need to do this business.
So where was that on the timeline in terms of legalization of cannabis in Canada?
So the federal government had just announced what was called at the time the MMPR, the first commercial production licenses for medical cannabis.
Right.
They hadn't been awarded. Of course, there had been one in 2016, which was a single source, government contract with one provider. They decided we're going to open this up. We're going to have a number of commercial providers. We're going to let them grow it. And frankly, we want to get out of the business of saying, yes, you're allowed, you're not allowed. We're going to let them interact directly between client, doctor, medical cannabis company. And so we applied for that license. And we were early in terms of its awareness. I think we found out about a week after it was put out in the Gazette, the Canadian Gazette, as you know, but most people don't. It's really not a consumer-facing publication.
Yeah, this is a publication that puts out sort of opportunities to do business with government, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah.
So cannabis is legal in Canada at this point for medical purposes only. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
It was before it became fully legalized in the country.
And the added layer of complexity was that if you had a prescription, which they refused to call it a prescription because that would imply that it was a real drug, that it would right. Then deserve a drug identification number, et cetera. They called it a medical document. If you had a medical document, then you would have to go to Health Canada and say to Health Canada, here it is. Then you would have to pass their sort of eligibility test. Now they wanted to remove that step from the process and say, we're not in the business of deciding who gets this or who doesn't. We're going to leave that strictly up to the doctors. And so they said, let's open up these licenses and we're going to let people start to grow and sell.
Wow. Now, I want to take a step back because one of the kind of lessons that other people share about going into business is that you should be some kind of expert in the space. And in this case, if I'm not mistaken, you knew as much about cannabis as you did about anything else at that point, right? I mean, this is not like somebody who's worked in a particular industry for years and then decides to open their own practice. It was nothing like that. You just saw the opportunity. What didn't arise out of your knowledge or expertise. Is that right?
Yeah. The first half of that story is that business is business. And I saw a good opportunity. And we would often say to ourselves, we were making widgets. Right? Whether we were an agronomics company growing soybeans or cannabis flowers at its core should not affect how we do this business. And, we wanted to think about it that way and look at it that way. But I'll admit there was a real change in all of that for me. If I may, a very personal story, as I mentioned with my father, after we had set out to start this business and really dug our heels in, like we shut down all of our other businesses, we wrapped everything up, we invested every penny we had into this business. We were making a serious go of it. And I remember a mentor I had, Ross Jardine, out in Kamloops, BC. He had actually started what turned into SportsMart, sold, of course, to Sports Check, and Jardine Campion, his middle name, motorboats. And he always said to me, Adam, if you're going to start a business, your mortgage has to depend on it. And I really remember taking that to the bank. And so when we said, okay, Hydropothecary is this one that's going to make us, something, we're going to put everything in. And literally our mortgage depended on it because we were mortgaged to the hilt on this business. So long story short.
And sorry, just to be clear about that, the mentality behind that is you need to care about the outcome of this, right? Like it can't be this thing you're doing over on the side where, hey, if it works out, great. If it doesn't, we're all fine, because then you're not gonna take all those extra steps. You're not gonna fight as hard as you would if your house depends upon it.
That's right. And I think the added layer on that is that you can't be doing something else at the same time. Right. If you're going to do this, just do this, put everything you have into this and focus on one thing. So we were off to the races. we were all in on this business, and my dad gave me a call to say that he had just been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and that he had 12 months left to live, which is always a tough call to get. And so, it really put feet to fire because a few months down the road from there, my dad had used cannabis, obtained illegally because the pain from the chemo and everything, and he wanted to try it. He wasn't a stranger to it from his youth, unlike mine. And so he decided to keep trying that. And I remember he would call, and it was the nicest, gentlest way to say, please hurry up. This really works. And, just sort of saying, I've tried this and boy, it makes a difference. And so, I had this in my head. We had heard anecdotally, I think most people know someone, or they know someone that knows someone that has, had an incredibly positive medical experience with cannabis in which it's helped them for something. And I didn't have one of those direct connections until my dad. And so when we got our license to sell, so how it quickly worked, you were given a first phase of license that allowed you to grow it, then another phase that allowed you to store it. And then if you passed all of those and then you could prove everything else that you could sell it properly and package it properly, you were then given a sales license. And for us, there's about a 2-year gap between it, which was such an incredibly challenging part for our business because we had to pay for everything and we had this burn rate, but we weren't allowed to generate any revenue. Nonetheless, we got our license, and that day my dad signed up as our first client. And I remember calling him saying, Dad, I can do something. I can finally help, because that's the thing about cancer and any of these other terminal diseases. It just makes you feel so powerless when, you can do so much in your life, but you can't help someone that you love. For me to be able to go and say, here's at least something that'll make this a little bit better. So I said, Dad, you're signed up. He had already had his medical document ready. I said, here, talk to the customer service guys, order what you want, and then we're going to get this out to you. And I remember about 5 minutes later, I got a call from our director of client service, Max here. And he said, so your dad just ordered $1,600 worth of cannabis. He says you're going to pay for it. And it's not like the company was paying for it. I was paying for it. And I hadn't had an income for 2 years. And I was like, it's fine. Let him have it. We got it in the mail. We shipped it off. And I hopped on a plane a few days later. And I went and saw my dad. And he had moved out to a little place in Spring Lake, Alberta. And sitting out on the back of his porch, hearing the birds, he took a little bit in a ventilator. Now, he had already lost one lung and he had limited capacity in his other one, but even just a few wisps on a vaporizer of our bedtime product, he fell asleep. And I remember, I pulled a blanket over him and I called Sebastian and I said, Sebastian, it works. And he goes, yeah, man, I know. And I said, no, you don't know. This really, really works. My dad can barely walk. He can't eat, he can't do anything, and he's comfortable. This works. And so for me, what was just an entrepreneurial capitalist pursuit became something much more. And I'm very grateful for our customer service team and our medical department. And I always say to them, treat every client like they were my dad.
Wow. What a great story. And I think it comes back to Ikigai, right? Again, that what does the world need, and how do you do something that's going to help the world, right? There was a powerful illustration of it, a very personal one for you, right?
I hope I didn't dig too deep.
Impossible on this show, Adam. No, that's a really powerful and personal story. And so I know it as well. You described going all in, getting rid of your other pursuits and selling your other businesses. And I know you also borrowed from family and friends to get this going, right? That was part of the initial funding for the business. So what was that experience like? Because now it's not just your mortgage, but it's other people's money, people you care about.
Everything changes when it's other people's money. It's one thing to lose your own. It's another to lose others. We had raised capital before in limited amounts. And, Senator Jerry Grafstein wrote my first ever investment check. And I remember the glee that I had from not only having a business partner like that, but from my first investment. But it was very different than going to family and friends because we didn't know anybody that had any money. We didn't come from wealthy families and we didn't have wealthy friends. And so we put together $1.13 million back in 2013 in raises of mostly $10,000 and $15,000 financing. Like, we were going to friends that were taking out line of credits to give us $10,000 because they believed in us so much. And I often think back to that, to New Year's Eve in 2013, as we turned the clock to 2014, that we had about 40 people in my house, which was also our office, which was also the boardroom, you name it. And as the countdown happened, everything slowed down, everything, just like in the movies. And the noise went quiet and I could see everybody. And I realized that of the 40 people in my house, at least 35 of them were now invested in shareholders in our company. And oh my God, if this doesn't work, like, where are we going to sleep? None of these people even let us sleep on their couches.
Yeah, and what's next year's New Year's Eve party going to look like, right? If you lose everybody's money. So what was that? I love that story, by the way. I read that story and was going to ask you about it. But what was that feeling like of knowing just how much was at stake in this? I know you had a lot of faith in what you were doing and you saw the potential for it, but there's always that downside, right?
I can say truthfully, there were a few times where I was scared. There was a number of times where I was incredibly anxious. There was only one time that I genuinely had doubt in my mind. And it wasn't even that New Year's, because for me, there was a lot of fuel in that fire, right? I'm a guy that works well under pressure. And to have that sort of ownership, I mean, I'm going to continue to do the same in all of my other projects that I get involved in. I'm going to bring in a big group of people that I know, because I want to continue to have to work that hard, that it's other people's money, right? I think that was, honestly, it was an opportunity that we seized and really worked to our advantage.
The interesting thing about that, Adam, is that whether they're people who end up in your living room for a New Year's Eve party, your investors are people who have, their personal money invested in your company. You might just not know them as well. And whether it's your dad or it's somebody else's dad, your customers are people like your dad, right? And you might just not know them as well. So it feels like the fact that your dad was the first customer and the fact that family and friends were the first investors simply personalized it for you and constantly reminded you of what was at stake. Those things are at stake anyway. It's just easier to pretend they're not if it isn't people in your life who are the customers and investors in your business, right?
It was exactly that, a face to the name.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of the things that happened early on in the business? Because you have some great stories that you share in the book about some critical moments and some, I'm thinking about the first harvest when I believe you went around and had to buy from dry cleaning shops a whole bunch of hangers. So can you tell that story?
So that was Thanksgiving 2014. And yeah, we had planted our first crop. It was a 7,000 square foot greenhouse, which at the time was huge. And we would tour investors through and be like, look at this, right? We now have over 1 million square feet at that location. And our partner, Louis, the grower, he came in the room one day, and I remember, and he said, guys, we have to harvest the crop now. And we're like, Louis, well, what are you talking about? Like, it's not for another week. We're not ready for this. And he's like, it has to come down now. Now. He's like, every hour is lost. And we're like, okay, so let's do this. And again, I speak about the differences between Sebastian and I. And, this is another perfect illustration of why we were such a good team, is that Sebastian's like grabbing the scissors and he's sprinting as fast as he can to the greenhouse to start going. And I'm going, where the heck is my laptop? Because I'm about to put an ad out online and I'm going to go find 10 people that can get here in a few hours. And so we always kind of had that great counterbalance of doing and planning. And so we had to harvest all this stuff. Now, we were figuring it out because none of this had been done at scale legally ever. And anyone that ever told you that they had harvested that much cannabis legally at scale was simply not telling the truth. So we had to figure it out as we went. And I remember saying to Louis at one point, like, how did we miss this? How do we learn from this? And he goes, Adam, I'm an excellent grower. My entire life, I've grown award-winning flowers. He goes, never once have I had to harvest any of them. We're all learning here. And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. Like everything, the thing. And to come to the industry as a whole, cannabis was this massive full vertical. We had to do propagation, we had to do seed growth, we had to do branding, productization, customer support, logistics, distribution. We did everything. And it was a lot to sort of cram into a very short period of time. But back to the story, we had to do a harvest. We had to figure out how to hang these things. And we decided that wire coat hangers were the best things to hang. And we had ordered a bunch, but they hadn't arrived yet because we didn't expect to have to do it. So like you said, I went around to every dry cleaner I could in Ottawa in my beat up Mazda 3 that you could hear from a mile away. And I loaded the hatchback filled with thousands of wire coat hangers, and I ran them into the farm. And I remember it was a Sunday. It was a Sunday, and then it was the Sunday, Monday of that Thanksgiving weekend. My second daughter had been home for barely a month, and my wife's like, "Am I going to see you at all this weekend?" And I'm like, "I don't think so." And we harvested and we harvested and we harvested. Sebastian's mom was in the greenhouse with us. We're all suited up. We've got masks on. We've got full cover. No one knew who was who. And the two ladies beside us who were harvesting were talking about Sebastian and I. No idea who we were, saying, oh, there's these two guys, these two kids from Ottawa who've really built this thing up. And I mean, it was kind of like an episode of Undercover Boss.
Yeah, that's amazing. And those are the kinds of things that happen in the foundational moments of a business, right? And you always look back on those fondly, but you hope you never have to repeat them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I've heard you talk about the fight or flight instinct that kicks in sometimes for entrepreneurs and founders. Can you expand on that a bit and how you handled it and how you handled the stress and the pressure as you were growing this business?
Well, not having really another option played a role in really sort of deciding that binary decision of fight or flight. But for us, I mentioned earlier, there was a number of times I was anxious. There were times that I was very stressed. There was a moment when I had doubt. But the key for me in all of that was Sebastian and Mina to a larger extent. When it came to life and Mina was on my wife was on extended maternity leave for twice during the genesis of this company, that we were largely living off of her employment insurance. Right. And that was our sole source of our income. And having gone from being a consultant, making, very generous six figures, to which my wife married this guy who was making six figures and didn't work a lot and was, really excited about always being around, to making literally nothing and being gone all the time. I'm very lucky that she saw the long-term opportunity and wanted to play that through. But at the same time, there was one day that Sebastian and I had coffee upstairs in my house, and that was it. Only once, because that wasn't a workplace. That was that was where my family lived. And I remember things were bad. We had our license in jeopardy. We weren't sure if we would ever get a license. There was a little bit of investors' money left. And for the first and only time, I thought maybe we need to have a real conversation about just winding this thing up and giving the investors back at least pennies on their dollars. And I mentioned that to Seb. He hung up the phone. He drove straight over. And we sat upstairs in my living room and we had coffee, and he was exactly what I needed at that point in time. You always need to have one parent in the raft paddling. That day, he did that in spades. And he looked at me and he said, we are going to figure this out. And I thought to myself, you are so full of BS, but man, I love it. I'm feeding off of it. Like, yes, we are going to do this. Yes, this is going to work. And he was right. And I mean, Sebastian carried not just this business, but me a number of times, and he deserves all the credit.
And I find that really interesting because I think this is a story about a great partnership as well as a story about a great business. And not every business is a partnership, right? So there are lots of entrepreneurs who start a business on their own, and I see this all the time in the entrepreneurs I interact with, where they have a moment like the one you just described and they feel very alone and isolated.
Yeah.
And they can't talk to the people on their team about it because they won't understand, or they'll start to worry about their own future. And they can't talk to their family about it because their family will might steer them in a different direction, or might start to worry themselves or something like that. But you had a partner, right? So that's an essential part of this story, I think.
Completely. You nailed it, Mark. I mean, so the one thing that I insisted on affording myself through those 80 to 90-hour work weeks was pub trivia. And I mean, Ottawa's a great city for pub trivia and the Trivia Hall of Fame League. And we've been playing now for 10, 15 years. And the problem is that I'd go to the pub on a Monday night and all of my pub teammates were investors. And they'd all look at me going, "So how's it going?" And after a while, when it didn't seem to be going too well, they'd look at me and say, "So how's it going?" And all I wanted to do was pull my hair out and say, like, this is an incredibly challenging situation, but I couldn't because they were shareholders, right? And so you just like, you keep the brave face.
Yeah. So how did you turn things around from there and get yourself on the path to the great success that you became?
Well, look, I do believe that hard work pays off. But as I said, and this really isn't mine. It's Mark Cuban who said this the best, and a lot of people talk about the same thing. But I'm going to come back to luck and time, and how those two are often synonymous terms in business. The timing and therefore the luck that all came. I mean, let's break this down. We built a good business. We had solid fundamentals. We were in a good industry. It was hard. And what was the hardest part is that we lacked sufficient capital to do it. If we were properly capitalized, we could have afforded the delays. We could have afforded the mistakes. The problem for us is that we couldn't. And so every mistake and every delay was like near backbreaking. I remember, Mark, there was a time where Ed, our CFO, Sebastian, and I got together, and everything we had was 3-season at the farm, right? Because it was like a flower shop and it would wind up and close for the winter. And so it was a 3-season place, but we were in the middle of winter and we were yet again on the verge of bankruptcy. Like we didn't even have next week's payroll in the bank. And we owed, tons of money out to suppliers and vendors, and there were ongoing costs. And we had no idea when our license would ever come or if it would. And we had to do this exercise where I said, "Okay, guys, we got to sit down." I grabbed a pad of Post-it notes and I said, "Ed, just tell me everything that we own that's worth anything." Well, there was an old beat up diesel pickup truck that we got when we bought the farm. Stick to the wall. Well, there's that house that's on the farm. Stick that to the wall. All right, what else do we have? Well, there's this equipment that we just bought. Maybe we could okay, put it on the wall. Guys, how are we going to make payroll? What are we going to do? Because that was normal for us. Those 5 or 6 we're dead situations kept happening. But again, with the right team, with the right people, time changed. Markets accepted, licenses came. The industry had these little, it had some kinks, but it started to turn and we survived. We continued to work relentlessly, that when things started to change, we were there to seize it. So the industry started to change. People started buying products more and more. Broader market acceptance led to more sales. And then, of course, legalization happened. And we never built our business on that, but we always knew that if that did happen, oh boy, hold on.
And it did. And there you go. But I think that comes back to what you said very early on about relentless effort, right? That's it. But I think there's another ingredient here too, which is that you as an entrepreneur, and I say this to people as often as I can, you have to put yourself in a position where that relentless effort is in the right space, in an area where there is the potential to grow, so you want to paddle hard, but you also want to paddle with the current, not against it, right? And I think you guys had that going for you as well, which doesn't take anything away from the hard paddling, but you picked a space and went all in on something that had a chance of being successful.
Yeah. I mean, so this is funny. I have this conversation more often than I think people might think, but people will say, "Man, talk about right time, right place. You were you really picked that well." And then it's always then there's always this sort of caveat, "But I don't want to take anything away." And it's like, no, you're absolutely right. We were at the right place at the right time. And thank God that we had spent those 2.5 years pushing like we had to be at that point in time, and to have not flighted, but to continue to fight to be where we were, because otherwise, man, we would have missed that opportunity. And that would have been brutal.
Yeah. By the way, I just learned something earlier today when I was listening to another podcast about, have you ever heard this? That if you type relentless.com into a browser, do you know where it goes?
No,
It goes to Amazon, because
no.
that was a domain that Jeff Bezos registered very early on. So if you go to a browser and type in relentless.com, it goes to Amazon. So and I mean,
I look forward to one day buying that domain from Jeff.
because there's a guy who was relentless, right? So, and
Yeah.
is relentless. You brought something up earlier that I wanted to come back to, which is the concept of return on failure. Can you expand on that?
Again, not mine. I didn't come up with that. The Harvard Business Review, I think, has the best sort of academic information on it, how they quantify it, how they explain it. But honestly, failure needs to be something that's learned to celebrate. You need to celebrate failure and share it. So we actually, for a period of time at our senior management team around HEXO, would have this notion of celebrating return on failure and sharing by it. So it's like, okay, I screwed up. Okay, we made a mistake. What was the mistake? Why was it a mistake? What did we learn? And how do we prevent it from happening again? And I remember I was speaking to a close friend of mine who's also a business owner operator, and he reached out to me articulating, in despair, this mistake, this failure that he had. And I thought, and I wrote back to him like, man, congratulations on having such a powerful failure that you can learn so much from. Like, now that you've screwed that up, you won't screw that up again. And think about how much success is on the horizon as a result. And I think, that's hard to hear in the moment, but return on failure should be at least celebrated along the same lines as we consider a return on investment. I mean, we all know that you can learn a hell of a lot more from failure than you learn from your successes.
Yeah. And it's funny because I feel like when people talk about, oh, failure's a great teacher, or everybody should embrace failure, that it sounds like a platitude, like it sounds like a new agey kind of, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, that it's a mindset or an outlook, as opposed to what it really is, which is something deeply practical and meaningful, that I just heard a great interview recently with one of the founders of Netflix, Mark Randolph, about how what they got good at was testing bad ideas really fast, so that eventually they found the good idea. And that's basically what failure is. It's just simply trying something that doesn't work, so you can learn from that and move on to the next attempt, and eventually something will work. And that's the way people look at it in science. But they don't necessarily look at it that way in business.
Yeah, I agree. It's that's exactly. I think fail fast and return on failure go hand in hand, but they're very different things.
Can you talk about a mutual friend of ours, Julie Buin, who co-authored the book with you, brought up this term to me and suggested we talk about it today, which is being a stretcher founder. What is a stretcher founder?
So I don't know. I suspect this exists elsewhere, but it was a term I used quite a bit in. So I stepped down from my operational role in HEXO in 2019. I had the pleasure of serving a number of key roles in that organization, be it COO and then Chief Brand Officer. And I was on a mission to hire myself out of a job where, Sebastian and I were 29 years old. We were in a 152 square foot basement with a 5'7" ceiling, and, in a 114-year-old semi-detached that leaked, that may have had a few mice. And we looked at ourselves, and Seb kept saying, we have a 5% chance at building $1 billion company. Now, he was wrong about the odds, but he wasn't wrong that we could make it happen. And, we said to each other then and time again, the only way this will work is if we fill the room with people smarter than us at what they do and empower them to do it. And, the notion of strong teams made a lot of sense. So there was a day when, in 2019, I remember looking around the room. We had a great chief marketing officer. There was a director of communications, someone leading innovation. That was something that was very close and dear to me. There was someone leading sales and business development that I had, got to work with for a few years and felt very comfortable having in that role. And I remember thinking to myself, actually, if I'm being brutally honest, the conversation went to something along the lines of pallets. We had, 9, 10 different facilities across the country. There was a couple of distribution centers. And after about 15 minutes of talking about the size of pallets and which ones were going where, I looked up at the ceiling and I thought, no more. Like, this is now a business that requires business operators. And I'm not a business operator. I have never been, I never will be. I am good at building businesses and I will continue to do that. But boy, oh boy, I don't want to operate them. And do I want to support them? 100%. Do I want to be there for them and make sure they have what they need? Absolutely. But I just know they can do what I can't do. And so I looked around the room. I was lucky enough to go on a trip not long after that. And we went to France and then spent a little bit of time vacationing in Spain. And I was on a beach with my family in Tossa de Mar on Costa Brava. And like, almost as if I got hit by a wave, I was like, that's it, I'm done. And I remember walking back to our apartment with Mina and I said, this is it. When I get back, I'm sitting down with Seb, and like, the team is good. There will never be a perfect time for me to leave. There will always be another thing that I have to sort out or another problem. And I would always say, if I just hire this person, if I can just hire this person, then it will be okay for me to go. And I realized that that was not true. And so, to your question, I did not ever want to be a stretcher founder, which meant that as the founder, I would simply lay around on a stretcher and everyone else would have to pick me up and carry me wherever we were going. And I was adamant that I would not become a stretcher founder. So I proactively got ahead of that one.
Right on. Can you talk more about the culture you tried to create? Because I know that was an important part of the equation for you.
Yeah. I believe in storytelling. I believe in understanding where we've come from. I'll be honest, a big part of the book that we wrote was for the employees that we have today that weren't there, driving into work and seeing that Sebastian had been there since 4 a.m. digging a ditch, that weren't there seeing that we didn't leave the farm in 4 days because we were managing some emergency comms crisis. Like, there's this whole part of our story that people don't know. And it's important to me that the staff who work as hard today as we did then understand that we know what they're going through. But the story begins obviously much before that. And I always remember the first 50 employees we hired. I picked the first 50 employees that we hired together with Sebastian and a few others. And it was important to me that any new hire I got 45 minutes with. And it was, let me tell you the story of where we came from and why we do this. And it is, it's something that I was then able to transition to an excellent HR team that kept that training and onboarding going. And I would, at every point in time I would speak to the team and just sort of say, guys, thank you. What you're doing makes all the difference. And for me, culture is about basically people understanding how hard you're working. I've been that guy that's worked so hard. And if you're doing that for someone else, you want to know that they know. And I think in our case, we do know, but people don't always hear it. So I always like to build a culture of appreciation, not fear, a culture of recognition, not uncertainty. And, there's no better way to do that than with a little bit of time in.
I know marketing is also something that you were very personally connected to, and maybe a good example of that is the Never Jaded tour that you launched. And can you talk a little bit about what that was, how you conceived of it, and what you learned about marketing through carrying that out? And by the way, I should preface this by saying that certainly one of the challenges you faced as a cannabis company was there would be all kinds of rules and parameters around what you were allowed to do from a marketing perspective and what you were not allowed to do, right? So that was a big part of the story. You couldn't advertise the way so many other companies can.
Yeah. Talk about timing, because the timing for us to be now in our early 30s, now with a business that's capitalized. And this is, of course, the Never Jaded tour kicked off just on the cusp of Canada's legalization of recreational cannabis. So our company had been public for a little while. We were well capitalized. We were in a position to be able to start to actually compete. And there was no playbook. There was no one had done this before. We weren't, Seb and I in our early 30s weren't competing against executives that had been doing this for 20, 30 years, because no one had. And our competitors that would look to how tobacco or alcohol had been marketed in those different things was a different set of rules, right? It was a blank slate and an open opportunity that doesn't happen often for young people to come in and not have a disadvantage at a lack of experience over others. So when we kicked off the Never Jaded tour, I mean, it was 100 miles an hour. Everybody was like, guys, we have money. We have to spend. We have to return on invest on all of this. We have to get our name out there, because as soon as Canada legalizes recreational cannabis, a new act would come in. And that new act had even stricter and more stringent regulations on marketing. So it was like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go all in big until, what day? And it was like, okay, till 2 days before. And then someone's like, hey, we should make it 3 days before, just in case. We're like, no, we'll do it till 2 days before. And again, I was off. I was on the road. We were doing concerts. Talk about like, so waking up and being like, where are you? I remember found myself in a bathroom, in a large bathroom, but a bathroom with Method Man and RZA, and just hanging out. And Method Man not saying a thing after an excellent concert again, just biting an apple. And we're chatting. I'm chatting away with RZA, and he looks at me and he passes this half-eaten apple to me as if I want to bite. And I'm like, no, I'm good. And I thought, where are we? What is happening right now? It was one of those sort of, you tag a bookmark in your life. That was one of those moments. But we had just thrown a great concert. We had Wu-Tang come out and do a performance for us. It was all in terms of brand building. Sony was doing a documentary on them at their 25th anniversary, and they followed us there. So, HEXO luckily got into that Sony documentary in a big way. And it was just one of many weird, incredible, odd, unbelievable moments of this journey at HEXO.
Yeah, incredible. And so what are some of the essential lessons that you have learned from this whole experience? If you were to share kind of the top 2 or 3 things that you've learned about business, entrepreneurship, life from this crazy ride that you had.
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I said it at the beginning, and I think it needs repeating. You have to continue to work hard. You have to, Mark, I think you added on a nice layer to that you have to be going in the right stream. You have to be working hard at something that makes sense. But if you work hard, if and when luck comes, you have to be ready for it. Because if you're sleeping, someone else is working and someone else is doing it. If you're off on a holiday, someone else is going to get that luck when it comes. So I think that you have to keep working hard, and you have to be patient. You have to have that determination and perseverance to wait for when things do start to change, because as much as you'd love for that to be in your control, timing is not. It's just not in your control. I think that there's a beautiful sort of conscious awareness that comes from that, where you can then at the end of the day say, this one didn't work, and it's not really my fault. The timing wasn't there. I'd referenced Cuban earlier, but never gave his exact example. He said, if I had to do it all over again and I woke up tomorrow with nothing, I'd probably be able to start a business worth a couple $1 million, maybe 10. But to be there to seize the right timing on an opportunity likely would never, ever happen in my lifetime again. And I think that that's very true. So, I think that timing is tied into that need for perseverance. I think you need to find support, because I don't care how strong you are. After a while, if you don't have someone that you can talk to, someone that you can rely on, and someone you can open up. When I first moved to Ottawa to work in politics, I was given some really great advice. They said, Adam, politics is going to be all sorts of people and all sorts of relationships. You need to find one person, pick one person, and you vent to them about people, about all the people that drive you crazy, about all your problems, but do not vent to anyone else. Do not do it in a pub. Do not do it anywhere else. Have someone to vent to. And that did help, because you can't, that world all better than I do, right? You've got to be very careful about what you say all the time. And so you got to find your support. And I think that that's really key. And the last part is to tie it back to Ikigai. You can run, you can push, you can work, you can get lucky, but at some point in time, you really got to figure out what you'll do that'll make the world a better place, because that part will be missing from your life. And until you find that, there'll always be a little emptiness that you'll never be able to fill with more money or more work.
That is very wise. But I love that point about finding the one person to vent to and only venting to that person. I think we should all follow that advice. Last question, Adam. You talked about your 6-word life story earlier and how it doesn't necessarily apply anymore. Can you talk a little bit about how the great success that you've achieved, how it has changed your outlook, your dynamics? I'm not suggesting it's changed you, but it's changed a lot of the circumstances around you. So what impact has that had?
What did I say? something to prove, nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Until about 10 years ago, that couldn't be
Yeah.
more true. So now it would be something to share, something to give, something along those lines. Someone asked me, who do you look up to the most today? And I, without thinking, I said, I hope to give my time. I want to give my time so freely, and I want to give my money like Chuck Feeney did. He was the billionaire who wasn't, right? The duty-free founder who gives his money in his lifetime. And I want to give my time. My perfect week is spending time with 5 or 6 different entrepreneurs that I'm invested in, both with money and time. And I have conversations with them. I talk them through some stuff. We work on some projects. We work on some files, and I get to spend time with my family. For me, I want to be able to share. I want to share my time, and I want to, share what we built.
Incredible. Well, this has been so much fun, Adam, and I've learned so much from hearing these great stories, but also from the wisdom that you have gained from all of these incredible experiences. I'm so grateful for all the stories that you've shared and the perspective, and I'm going to be thinking about this for a long time. This is already one of my favorite episodes of Digging Deep. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's an incredible opportunity. I'm a huge fan. You are such a pro at this. I thank you for having me on.
What an interesting story. I really enjoyed hearing about how Adam got that entrepreneurial spark when he was young, and how he took all the lessons of his family business and applied it to HEXO. And I learned a lot from his perspectives about culture and more. Adam is now on to his next thing, a blockchain and digital asset custody company called Brain. So once again, thank you to Adam Miron for joining us on Digging Deep. If you enjoyed this episode, please review it and share it with others. That's going to help us produce more great episodes. And if you want to keep digging deep into topics and lessons like this, you can see the show notes, you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter, you can read my blog. All of that is at letsdigdeep.com. That's letsdigdeep.com. And get ready for more great stories and powerful lessons on the next edition of Digging Deep. Thank you for listening.